In our final lesson of the module, we're going to work through some informational texts and use them to identify evidence to make connections within the text or comparing between two different texts, and draw conclusions based on the evidence that we are given. So let's begin by looking at how we make connections with the compare and contrast relationship. So in an earlier module, we worked through text structures. And as you recall, compare and contrast relationships was one of the text structures that we went over. So let's take a moment and recap the purpose of the compare and contrast text structure. So authors will often use compare and contrast to discuss ideas, events, people, or things. So the reason that an author will do this is because they are trying to make a point by looking at comparisons and contrasting different ideas or people or things. So when authors compare, what they are doing is showing how two subjects or topics are similar. So in comparison, we are looking for similarities. When authors contrast, they are outlining how two subjects or topics are different. So when comparing, as I said, we are looking at similarities. When an author contrasts, they are outlining the differences. Now, we also talked about how authors will use signal words that will provide us clues that they are using the compare or contrast relationship. So when they are comparing, some words to look for would be in the same way, both, and similarly. So when we see those, we know that they are using compare and contrast. They're using compare. When they contrast, they will use signal words such as unlike, on the other hand, or however. So when we see those words used, then most likely the author is contrasting two different ideas. So now that we have recapped how the compare and contrast relationship works, let's take a look at our passage. Watch a weather report and you'll probably hear the meteorologist talk about pressure systems. A low pressure system develops when air becomes hot and moist compared to the surrounding air. As the hot air expands, it rises upward where it cools. A high pressure system is different in that air from higher in the atmosphere sinks down. The sinking air prevents warm air from rising, so the atmosphere is stabilized. High pressure systems bring dry, sunny weather. In the case of low pressure systems, the rising air cools to the point that clouds form, and rain or snow may fall. How do meteorologists know which pressure system is present? They detect low and high pressure systems by measuring air pressure with electronic sensors. Now, in this passage, we are asked to identify whether or not these details describe low pressure systems, high pressure systems, or both. So we're going to look for evidence in the passage to support whether these details apply to one, the other, or both. So first, occur when air sinks down. Let's take a look at the passage and see if we can determine which one or which pressure system that detail applies to. At the beginning, we are told that a low pressure system develops when air becomes hot and moist compared to the surrounding air. As the hot air expands, it rises upward. Okay, so low pressure system air rises upward. Okay, so we know that this does not apply to a low pressure system. A high pressure system is different in that air from the higher in the atmosphere sinks down. Okay, so with a high pressure system, we are told that the air sinks down. So that detail applies only to high pressure systems. In this case, the author is making a contrast, describing how they are different. Cause clouds to form. If we continue reading, high pressure systems bring dry, sunny weather. In the case of a low pressure system, the rising air cools to the point that clouds form. Okay, so we are told that low pressure systems cause clouds to form. High pressure systems bring dry, sunny weather. Doesn't mention anything about clouds. So we do not have any evidence to support that a high pressure system causes clouds to form. So in this case, this is describing low pressure systems, but not high pressure systems. So once again, the author is making a contrast. Are detected by electronic sensors. The very last sentence, they detect low and high pressure systems by measuring air pressure with electronic sensors. Okay, so low and high pressure systems. In this case, both are detected by electronic sensors. Here, the author is making a comparison. So now we see how we can use evidence to help identify whether an author is describing how two ideas or things are different, as well as how an author will compare how two different things are similar. An author will use a cause and effect relationship to make connections within a text to describe how two events are related. Specifically in that how one event may cause another event to happen. So as you read, the cause and effect relationship is designed to help you see how events or ideas in a text are connected to one another. Once again, writers will use signal words such as because, as a result of, led to, and consequently, to connect those causes with their effects. Let's take a look at a couple of examples to see how this relationship works. The Norman victory at the Battle of Hastings led to, okay, so there's our signal word. The Norman victory at the Battle of Hastings led to many changes in the grammar and vocabulary of the English language. Okay, so, which is the cause? Which is the effect? Well, it's saying that the Norman victory at the Battle of Hastings led to. Okay? So, this is the cause. Because the cause leads to the effect. So what was the effect? Changes in the grammar and vocabulary of the English language. So that is our effect. Let's look at the next example. In many industrial metropolitan areas, it is common to find cases of asthma, bronchitis, and emphysema resulting from long-term exposure to air pollution. Okay, so our signal word or signal phrase is resulting from. Now, in this case, it is being presented as the effect is a result of or resulting from the cause. So let's identify the effect. So we're told that it is common to find cases of asthma, bronchitis, and emphysema. So this is the effect. What caused it? Well, it resulted from long-term exposure to air pollution. So that is our cause. So now that we have a better understanding of how the cause and effect relationship works, let's take a look at a reading passage and see if we can match the causes outlined in the text with their effects. The grizzly is a large, powerful bear standing about 6 feet tall and weighing approximately 800 pounds. Due to the bear's impressive size and intimidating strength, many early settlers who explored the American West documented their encounters with the bear. When Lewis and Clark were traveling to the Pacific in 1805, for example, Lewis recorded how grizzlies surrounded their camp in Montana. As settlers continued to push westward, grizzlies were hunted and pushed out. Therefore, the majority of grizzlies in the American West have disappeared. Today, it is estimated that only 1,000 grizzlies remain in the United States. Let's take a look at the first cause that is presented. Grizzlies are large and frightening. Let's see if we can identify that in the text. So if you look at the second sentence, it states, due to the bear's impressive size and intimidating strength, many early settlers who explored the American West documented their encounters with the bear. Okay, so we're told that bears have impressive size and intimidating strength. Well, the cause says that they are large, so impressive size means that they're large, and they have intimidating strength, which is frightening. What was the effect? Many early settlers who explored the American West documented their encounters with the bear. So, in this case, grizzlies are large and frightening is the cause. Explorers recorded grizzly sightings is the effect. The next cause, grizzlies were hunted. We already know through process of elimination that means grizzlies have declined, but for practice, let's identify it. Let's identify the evidence in the passage. As settlers continued to push westward, grizzlies were hunted and pushed out. Okay, so there's our cause. Therefore, signal word, the majority of grizzlies in the American West have disappeared. Why? Because they were hunted and pushed out. So, since grizzlies were hunted, the number of grizzlies has declined. The final relationship that we are going to look at that an author will use to make connections with a text is what is known as the problem-solution relationship. Now, a problem-solution relationship is designed to help you identify the writer's opinion and point of view on a particular topic. So what they will do is present a problem, which is something that's going on that needs to be addressed, and will present one or more solutions to address that problem. As with other text structures, we can look for signal words to help us identify that the problem-solution relationship is being used. Some signal words to know will be question, answer, stop, fix, solve, should, must, and make sure. So as long as you watch for these signal words, it will help you see that the author is using the problem-solution relationship to make a particular point. In some cases, the author may even be presenting the information to try to persuade you to their point of view. Let's take a look at an example to practice identifying this problem-solution relationship. People should pile sandbags around the pond to make sure it doesn't overflow. In this case, we have two signal words to let us know that this is the problem-solution relationship. So what is the problem? People should pile sandbags around the pond to make sure it doesn't overflow. Okay, so that make sure is the signal word that's letting us know that the author is describing the problem. Well, what do they need to make sure of? Well, that the pond doesn't overflow. So our problem is that the pond might overflow. Well, what does the author suggest is a potential solution to address this? People should, so that's telling them something that it's in their best interest to do. That's cluing us in that here's the solution to the problem. To prevent the pond from overflowing, we need to do this. In this case, it's pile sandbags around the pond. So the solution being presented is that people should pile sandbags around the pond. Now that we have successfully identified what to look for in regards to the problem-solution relationship and how to make those connections, let's practice finding evidence in a passage to match a given problem with a solution. Before British scientist Alexander Fleming discovered antibiotics in the 1920s, bacterial infections could be deadly. After antibiotics were developed, though, doctors were able to treat infections and save lives. Over the years, however, antibiotics were overused. As a result, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, also known as superbugs, have appeared. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, about 2 million people become infected with superbugs every year. Canadian scientists may have stumbled on a surprising tool to combat the overuse of the drugs. By mixing maple syrup extract with antibiotics, the researchers were able to increase their effectiveness while reducing the dose amount. Down here, we are given two solutions. Let's see if we can first identify those in the passage. All right, so the first solution, antibiotics were invented. Okay, so in our first sentence, we see that Alexander Fleming discovered antibiotics in the 1920s. And of course, after antibiotics were developed. So we see that the solution is presented there. But if we look specifically at the first sentence, before British scientist Alexander Fleming discovered antibiotics in the 1920s, so before antibiotics were invented, what happened? Bacterial infections could be deadly. So in other words, infections were killing people. So since infections were killing people, the solution was antibiotics. Alexander Fleming discovered antibiotics and found that they could combat infections and prevent people from dying due to an infection. All right, next. The solution was scientists mixed maple syrup with medication. Well, we see this here, mixing maple syrup extract with antibiotics. Okay, so we are told that by mixing maple syrup extract with antibiotics, so that word by lets us know that this was a solution to a problem. Well, what was the problem? Let's look a little bit earlier in the passage. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, about 2 million people become infected with superbugs every year. Okay, so we know they're talking about superbugs. Let's see if we can go a little earlier. As a result, so antibiotics were overused. As a result, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, also known as superbugs, have emerged. Okay, so the superbugs, of course, were a effect of the overuse of antibiotics. Since the superbugs emerged, that was a problem, okay, because these antibiotics were not killing the superbugs. What was the solution? By mixing maple syrup extract with antibiotics. So, scientists mixed maple syrup with medicine. Because superbugs emerged. So based on the information presented in the passage, we can use this as evidence to help us match the problem with the solution. So, antibiotics were invented as a result of infections killing people. And then scientists mixed maple syrup with medication as a result of the emergence of superbugs. So, since infections kill people, that was a problem. Science came up with antibiotics. Superbugs emerge, so scientists mix maple syrup with medication.